Please become a Patreon supporter to keep Pocket Bios commercial free. Israel Putnam was born in 1718 in Salem Village, Massachusetts Bay Colony, British America, to Joseph and Elizabeth Putnam, a prosperous farming Puritan family. His parents had opposed the Salem witch trials in the 1690s, with his father-in-law, Israel Porter, and father, Joseph Putnam, signed a petition on behalf of the elderly Rebecca Nurse, who was accused. In 1740, at the age of 22, the young Putnam moved west to Mortlake, Connecticut, where land was cheaper and easier for young men to buy. While there, Putnam killed a wolf in Connecticut in 1743 with the help of a group of farmers from Mortlake seeking to safeguard their sheep. Putnam then reportedly crawled into the den with a torch, a musket loaded with buckshot, and his feet secured with rope in order to be quickly pulled out. While in the den, he shot and killed a wolf. In celebration, Putnam earned the nicknames of Wolf Putnam and Old Wolf Put. In 1755, at the age of 37, Putnam was one of the first men in Connecticut to sign up to serve as a private in the militia during the French and Indian War. During the war, he would be successfully promoted to second lieutenant, captain, major, lieutenant colonel, and colonel. Putnam was captured on August 8, 1758 by the Kanawaki Mohawks from a mission settlement south of Montreal, New France, during a military campaign near Crown Point in New York. He was saved from being ritually burned alive by a rainstorm and the last-minute intervention of a French officer. In 1759, Putnam led a regiment into the Valley of Death in the attack on Fort Carillon, and in 1760, he was with the British Army that marched on Montreal, New France. In 1762, he survived a shipwreck during the British expedition against Cuba that led to the capture of Havana. Major Putnam is believed to have brought back Cuban tobacco seeds to New England, which he planted in the Hartford area. This reportedly resulted in the development of the renowned Connecticut wrapper. In 1763, during Pontiac's rebellion, Putnam was sent with reinforcements to relieve Chief Pontiac's siege of Fort Detroit. After the war, he returned to his homestead. Putnam publicly professed his Christian faith following the 7 Years' War in 1765. He joined the Congregational Church in his town. He was among those who objected to British taxation policies. Around the time of the Stamp Act crisis in 1766, he was elected to the Connecticut General Assembly and was one of the founders of the state's chapter of the Sons of Liberty. In the fall of 1765, he threatened Thomas Fitch, popularly elected governor of Connecticut, over this issue. He said that Fitch's house will be leveled with the dust in 5 minutes if Fitch did not turn over the stamped tax paper to the Sons of Liberty. Israel Putnam had become a relatively prosperous farmer and tavern keeper, with more than a local reputation for his previous exploits. On April 20, 1775, while plowing one of his fields with his son, he received news of the Battle of Lexington and Concord that started a war the day before. He literally came off the plow, leaving it in the field and riding 100 miles in 8 hours, reaching Cambridge the next day and offering his services to the Patriot cause. Putnam was named a Major General, making him second in rank to General Artemus Ward in the Army of Observation, which preceded the founding of the Continental Army. Putnam was one of the primary figures at the Battle of Bunker Hill in June 1775, both in its planning and on the battlefield. During the battle, Putnam may have ordered William Prescott to tell his troops, "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes." It's debated exactly who said the words first. They're attributed to a number of different officers. In fact, as a child, I was told George Washington said it. In the planning of the Battle of Bunker Hill, Putnam was one in favor of also fortifying the adjacent hill, which later became known as Breed's Hill. This hill was closer to Boston, and from the hill, cannons could fire on British forces in Boston, forcing them to come out and attack the hill. The British soldiers were mowed down as they marched toward the American fortifications. However, the Americans ran out of powder and were eventually forced to retreat. American casualties were 449, while the British casualties were 1,054. By the standard of the day, the rebels lost, since they gave up the ground. On June 14, 1775, the Continental Congress voted to create the Continental Army, to replace the Army of Observation. French and Indian War veteran George Washington was chosen as Commander-in-Chief, with Israel Putnam and 3 others appointed as Major Generals under Washington. Of the votes, only Washington and Putnam were unanimous. After the Battle of Bunker Hill, Washington arrived and Putnam served under him in the siege of Boston. Due largely to the ingenious efforts of Major General Henry Knox, the British were forced to abandon Boston. Putnam's fortunes declined at the Battle of Long Island in August 1776, where he was forced to effect a hasty retreat from the British. Some in the Second Continental Congress blamed Putnam for the defeat, but Washington, who was in overall command and witnessed the battle, did not blame him. Putnam was fooled in October 1777 by a feint executed by British troops under the command of General Sir Henry Clinton, making way for Clinton's capture of Fort Montgomery and Fort Clinton. As was standard procedure, Putnam was relieved of command and brought before a court of inquiry for these losses. It was ascertained that the events in question were the result of a lack of men, not of the fault of any commander. Washington had also lost some of his faith in Putnam due to an incident in which Putnam delayed in forwarding troops to Washington when first ordered to do so. Washington felt he could not have Putnam in charge of troops in New York without the support of the state and transferred Putnam to recruiting duties in Connecticut. After the Court of Inquiry finished its investigation, Putnam was later put in command of the Eastern Division, consisting of 3 brigades of New Hampshire and Connecticut troops. In 1779, he was put in command of the right wing of the army. During the winter of 1778-79, Putnam and his troops were encamped at the site now preserved as Putnam Memorial State Park in Reading, Connecticut. On February 26, 1779, Putnam escaped from the British, riding down a steep slope in Greenwich, Connecticut, for which he became famous. In December 1779, Putnam suffered a paralyzing stroke, which ended his military service. The American Revolutionary War formally concluded on September 3, 1783. The last British troops departed New York City on November 25, 1783, marking the end of British rule in the newly formed United States of America. Putnam died in Brooklyn, Connecticut in 1790. He was buried in an above-ground tomb in the town's South Cemetery. He is honored with a monument at his burial site on Canterbury Road. In 1888, Putnam's remains were removed from the Brooklyn Cemetery and re-entered in a sarcophagus built into the foundation of a monument in his memory. Numerous places bear his name, including 9 counties, starting with Putnam County, New York, which embraces the east bank of the Hudson Highlands, where he once held command. Towns in New York and Connecticut are also named for him, also a local street in my hometown.